Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the leading employee benefits and engagement platform.
Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Vantage HR Influencers Podcast, and today I'm really excited to have Mr. Shaakun Khanna, who has more than 20 years of experience and is currently head of HCM Applications for Oracle. And this podcast, we're going to talk about how to develop informal leaders among employees. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Rohit. Thanks for inviting me and having me here.
Right. So I want to understand, how did you get into HR and what got you interested into the field of HR?
It's interesting, Rohit, since the topic of our discussion is how do we develop informal leaders.
Right.
I came into HR in a very informal manner. I started my career, and initial 10 years of my career, I was into hardcore sales and marketing. Part of sales and marketing also is about training and development.
Right.
That's where I got fascinated by the world of training and development. I actually started a sales training company of my own. And that's where I realized why leadership development is so important, critical, yet unaddressed largely in the market. So that's the space I got into. Rest is history now. After having run my own enterprise for a couple of years, I then went into hardcore HR consulting. So I am one of those HR consultants who's not really been a HR manager, or a HR professional, but that's what my journey has been. First 7-8 years of my HR consulting life was in hardcore strategy consulting, and now I deal with HR technology.
Very interesting. And so I wanted to understand, how do you identify influencers inside companies who can be groomed to be, informal leaders, and then, later on they can be formal, take up formal leadership roles inside the companies?
So Rohit, what is interesting about these influencers or budding leaders is that you don't really have to identify. They are very, very visible.
Right.
Ironically, a lot of managers and leadership teams out there are not very mindful. There are other times when people misunderstand a person's capability and the leadership initiative that he or she is taken, and often we see that is kind of extinguished or kind of buried under the expectations of a role and a job. So my first advice is that leaders and managers have to be very, very mindful and watch out for those people who are taking those initiatives, who are the go-to people for, people would just take their advice, people would take them to influence, So if a good manager knows who those people are, who's the go-to person in your team, that's the first step of looking at identifying these informal leaders. The second step is where these people raise their hands for multiple volunteering opportunities and multiple things that come their way. So therefore, it becomes an imperative for the leaders and managers to constantly create those opportunities so that people can volunteer for that. And in the process, these informal leaders can be identified. Most of the organizational initiatives to identify these kind of informal leaders, truthfully, to my mind, are still suboptimal, and they really don't, serve the purpose.
Got it. And, it becomes really important for young influencers who in these companies, especially with the young millennial generation who find it difficult to be engaged in a company for a long time. What are some of the ideas you would talk about on how to keep such leaders engaged so that, they could foresee a much longer journey with the company?
See, first of all, when you say, Rohit, much longer journey, I think we will have to recalibrate our expectations around longevity. The reality is that majority of the people, even the non-millennials, will not want to work in the same role, in the same job, or in the same industry, forget about the company, for a long period of time. So therefore, we need to set the expectations right. Now, that being said, in order to retain your key talent and leaders, it's important that you are able to leverage the key levers of engagement that are changing. I think the first lever that is coming very strongly is variety. Are you able to create variety in terms of the work, in terms of the environment, in terms of the opportunities for the individual? Because most of the people seek a new job, a new role, a new industry because they are actually seeking variety. So most of our career paths have now to be laden with the variety for individuals. I think that's the first step. The second step would be to look at flexibility. Now, not only you are giving variety, you are giving flexibility. Now, these, the new generation workforce, and I call it the Generation R, needs to try out new things. A survey that Cognizant did found out that 40% of the people want all their weekends now to be long weekends. I'm sure you would have read recently, perhaps it was Google, which announced that they'll do a 3-day weekend officially, at least till the time this is going. So these kind of things are on the rise, and they will be critical drivers of the engagement. And lastly, I think it's about meeting their aspiration, the growth aspirations, the financial aspirations, as well as the mobility or aspirations of people are very, very different. They are accelerated, so you will have to look at creating very accelerated career paths. So if a promotion earlier was seen due after 3 years, or in some cases it is still 5 years, it should come down to perhaps an 18-month cycle.
Correct. And how should we make such leaders aligned with the company's vision if like you mentioned that the duration of their work in a company has shortened down? It's not the 30-year journey. It's like a 3 or 5 year journey in a company, or much shorter than that. What steps should HR leaders do so that such informal leaders are aligned with the company's vision?
So first of all, Rohit, as you would have noted, a large part, and some estimates say about 60% of the work now happens or will start happening on a project basis. So therefore, a long career is irrelevant because majority of the people are working on project teams, short-term projects, couple of months together, and they any which ways get dismantled. So that's an important thing. One of the big things that all the organizations and individuals are struggling is the communication of the vision itself. Even today, majority of the people do not know what the vision of the company is, how they are contributing into it, and what is expected of them. Those 3 questions are still not answered properly to my mind. People want to do meaningful work. Organizations set some targets for them. They are not able to connect the meaning that they are seeking and the targets they are supposed to achieve together. And that becomes the role of the leader to be able to define what's the vision, where they are going, how they will reach it, and more importantly, what is the contribution of each individual there. That is still unfortunately untapped, unaddressed, and remains an ambiguous area.
Right, and you very interestingly mentioned that we'll do a lot of project sort of work, and if you look at last 70-80 years is where the 9-to-5 sort of a culture started in US. But do you think going forward we'll have a lot of project-based freelancing sort of work, or something like what Uber had conceptualized, where a lot of these gig workers, a lot of these freelancers and project type work is going to be the mainstay?
Absolutely, Rohit. In fact, this whole pandemic has accelerated the invasion of gig work culture into the organizations, I would say. Gig workers come secondary. The first step is invasion of the gig culture. Majority of the organization now are looking at engaging more and more gig workers, not only at the individual contributor levels or relatively junior levels, but even at a much senior levels. I know somebody who started a company who's providing CFOs to companies as gigs, right? So you could be a part-time CFO to 3 companies, right? And that's the kind of thing. What is even more important is some companies have already experimented with having part-time CEOs even, so that's the kind of invasion of the gig workforce that has happened. A lot of people are wanting to try out gig opportunities. We did a research where we found out this Generation R that I'm talking about, 74% of these people want to create multiple sources of income.
Right.
That means that alongside their regular employment, they would want to pick up a gig opportunity, and there will be a time when they would not see any sense in continuing with an 8 hour or a 40-hour week kind of a commitment, but move it to an outcome based. Now, interestingly, if you look at our experience during the pandemic, three things have happened. First of all, the concept of 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 or 8 to 9, whatever it was, is irrelevant now, right? We are all working 24/7, yet we are all at home and not working 24/7. So it's all boiled down on how are we delivering work. Secondly, majority of the organizations have realized that some of the traditional paradigms of work, for example, office attendance, number of hours put in, are of no consequence whatsoever. A lot of organizations, specifically in the technology sector, have seen significant rise in their productivity when people are working on their own through remote locations. We have seen behavior of people at an aggregated level change, where people are becoming more responsible, yet working with more flexibility. So I think all these things put together in the experience of the last 6 months have definitely accelerated the invasion of the gig workforce, work culture in the organizations. It has created conducive environments, and most importantly, it has changed the mindset of people to start doing that.
Interesting. And we had a past speaker, Mr. Harjeet Kanduja, who leads HR for Reliance, and he talked about how employees who were earlier recognized or rewarded yearly or quarterly, it's going to change, and it's going to happen like what happens with a lot of these gig workers, with like how Uber gig workers, or a lot of these gig workers are appreciated or rewarded in a real-time basis. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think appreciation and rewards and recognition would happen in a real-time basis rather than waiting quarterly?
Of course, I completely agree with Kanduja ji, because we are living in a world of instant gratification. Today you write a blog, you post it online, and immediately in an hour or two, you get all the appreciation or whatever. Gone are those days when you would submit something, it'll come out in a magazine after 3 months, and then you will figure it out, and you will sometimes not even know whether it was appreciated or not. So our lives are all about instant gratification when receiving, and also instant giving. We don't wait for an appropriate time. So that's going to happen.
Okay.
More and more organizations are now having platforms, and you people are into rewards kind of platform, and I'm sure you have also calibrated your technology and application to make sure that instant rewarding is there. Of course, there would be ceremonies, there would be milestones that will really get celebrated. I mean, a Nobel Prize will always be an annual event, right? It cannot become an instant gratification. But when it comes to people working together, offices, I don't think that anybody would have the patience or even the mindfulness to wait for a particular event and then reward people. One thing is that we have a very short attention span, and things happen and disappear very quickly. So that all put together is changing. Organizations must change their culture. In fact, many years ago, I used to work for Gallup, and one of the questions we used to ask in the Gallup survey was, in the last 7 days, have I received appreciation or recognition for doing good work? And in those days, it was very controversial whether 7 days is too frequent. I believe that 7 days now has become 7 hours, so people would actually look at, did I get something pat on my back in the last 7 hours? If not, it was a wasted day.
Very interesting. I want to again talk about the informal leaders. Do you think such informal leaders, there should be a KPI assigned to them so that they could also, they also understand, what are their KPIs before they get onto the formal leadership?
See, there is a dichotomy, Rohit, because one side you are saying informal leaders, and other side you are saying KPI, which is a very formal thing, right? So somehow they don't gel together, they don't marry together. Because as a leader, if you're putting a KPI to me, then I want to be a formal leader, right? Or if it is informal, organizations cannot. Somewhere I feel there is a controlling mindset. Organizations don't want to formally declare a person a leader, but at the same time, they want to formally track KPIs. That's not going to work. Neither it will work at an emotional level, nor it will work at an operational level. So remember, as I said earlier, informal leadership is all about being mindful, right? Influence will therefore be indirect, and it is the leaders, your formal leaders and their own capability that will define how observant they are, and therefore how they can qualitatively assess these leaders. See, as we are working remotely these days, and that is a trend that will continue, most of these qualitative aspects will go away and everything will become KPI driven, right? So therefore, informal leadership has to be something which has a humane touch, which has intuition, which has a personal touch to it. That being said, it can be formalized a bit by having some kind of project, some kind of volunteering that could still be measured in a quantifiable way. But to answer your question, I don't think that it's a good idea to have formal KPIs associated with informal leadership development initiatives.
Got it. And how much time do you think should be allocated in order to move such leaders in a formal leadership role?
Well, it all depends, because it's an informal. You can't have a yardstick. Again, as soon as possible. One thing is there, that this generation is not patient. I still remember many years ago in my career, I was told that I'm ready for the new job, but I'll still have to wait about a year to get that formally, which was essentially a great change or formalization of my leadership. And I patiently waited as if I was a farmer and I planted a tree and next year it will bear fruit. Not with this generation. Today, if you tell somebody you are ready today, but I'll reward you or I'll give you the position a year later, trust me, you will not find that person a year later when you will want. These practices are not serving any purpose. The other part is that organizations do not have, in my example, there was no dearth of talent and there were fewer jobs and more people.
Right.
Therefore, they had to wait for the seat to get vacant so that I could go. But today, that's not the case. There are opportunities both for the leader in question as well as the organization does not have a choice. So I think as soon as you realize that the cake is partly baked, I would say if you believe that the leader is about 80% ready, go for it, give it to him or her. Don't wait that, they should be 102% ready and then we will do that. Gone are those days.
Very interesting. How would you, build an ownership mentality among employees, especially with the younger generation who might look unfocused because they're into a lot of different things and there are a lot of variety of choices among them. But also during such a remote setup, how do we build up an ownership mentality among employees?
I think that's one side where I would believe that organizations have to be a little more ruthless. Or let me not use such a strong word, but organizations have to be very objective. In the 6 months ago, when we were not in this kind of a scenario where there is a global meltdown, job losses are there, millennials and incoming talent was really spoiled for choices, and organizations were far more patient with them. And in this process, some of them had become, irresponsible, right? In the name of talent crunch, war for talent, engaging the millennials, we've gone and spoiled the children out there, I would say. Spare the rod and spoil the child, and that's where. So I think it is the time to, continue to, give all the great things that we are giving, but at the same time, make them responsible for achieving the objectives or the outcomes that are defined. And that again ties back to my earlier point. The vision has to be very clearly defined and the outcomes have to be clearly mentioned. Now, any which ways, during these times and even going forward, it's very difficult to track what people are doing, right? So therefore, the only viable option for organizations would be to track the outcome of people. And once people know that, earlier people had, what is that called? What is the word that I'm looking for? Anyways, so earlier people had this notion that by the virtue of their qualification and the fact that they fit into this role, they are here and they are a gift to the organization. Now we don't know who you are, what do you do, therefore what you have produced is only important. So I think the good news is that part of this responsibility will automatically come, and part of the onus lies on the organization to bring that rod out and be empathetic yet objective with the new talent and those responsibilities that you're talking about.
Interesting. And I wanted to understand what did Oracle do to build engagement among employees in such a situation.
See, luckily for us, if you look at it, we are an organization where flexi working was always a way of work. I don't think that at any given point in time we had more than 45 to 50% of our total workforce actually working from home. So that also means that, coming to the office. So that also means that always for 50 to 55% of our people were working remotely. So we had a advantage and a cultural thing. But I think importantly during these times, the extent to which the organization has to be empathetic needs to be very, very high. So therefore, we've become far more concerned about the well-being of our people and are offering far more support, whether it is around ergonomics, whether it is around, mental health, physical health, and so on and so forth. The other thing we have done is we've looked at how we can bring the extended employee, which essentially means the families of the employees, into the safety net as well as into the support ecosystem that we have created. Because see, when I'm working from home, my work has invaded my house and it's not a choice that I'm exercising, it's a compulsion. Therefore, my family can't be, shut up for the whole day, or I can't, feel embarrassed about either my dog barking or, some noise coming in my kitchen and all that stuff. So the world is changing. That's how it is evolving, and organizations have to be more empathetic. If you look at it, in the first few days or weeks, there were very new kind of control freaks that were emerging. I know of an organization where it was mandatory for people to put on their video, right?
Yeah, correct.
Now later on, they realized though just creating a lot of stress. In fact, then other set of organizations went ahead and said that, hey, you know what? Don't put your video on if you're not comfortable. It's okay. At Oracle, for example, we are doing lot of these videos and Zoom calls. We declared one day that nobody will have a Zoom meeting, which is like declaring our day off earlier, because now the day off does not happen. So we actually mandated nobody will use Zoom on this day. And concurrently, it's not that I choose, I will not log in today, but my manager could call me, just come, you want to talk. So we declared a day like a no Zoom day, which, again, I think is very, very encouraging and had great benefits from a engagement and well-being perspective. So those are the few examples I can cite.
Right. And, very interestingly pointed out that before the pandemic, 40% or 40 to 50% of the employees would not come into office. But do you foresee a fully remote setup for companies as large as Oracle? I know there are a lot of smaller companies who've done a fully remote setup. But what are your thoughts? After the end of the year?
I think first of all, the big learning during the pandemic has been two things. One, the nature of the industry. Second, the size of the organization have got no role to play in evolution of this remote culture. I was talking to the CHRO of Tata Steel, Mr. Suresh Tripathi, and he said that we never imagined that we could run a steel company remotely, right? When it comes to a technology company, everybody says that this can be done. But they were able to do the same with the steel company. So as I'm saying, size of the organization as well as the the nature of the industry is of no consequence. So to answer your question, yes, a lot of companies will move to a permanent remote working kind of an environment. It will definitely get started with technology company because they are more adapted to be able to do that. But then it will come to other industries also. Some organizations have even gone ahead and decided to relook at the roles that their offices play. Facebook, for example, is now saying that office might become a hub of social interaction rather than a place where work happens, right? So you and I, as colleagues, will do all our work elsewhere, but we may still want to come and chit chat and meet and probably have a meal together in the office, and just feel good about it. I was earlier joking that there is a case for us to learn from Indian housewives. These ladies have a concept called kiddie parties where they do nothing but just catch up and have a meal together, enjoy. That could be the new office, because we just go there to catch up, chat up with people, and have a slightly different taste of life.
Nice. I quickly want to do the top three. What's your favorite business book?
My favorite business books, I have a couple of them, but these days I think this one, Factfulness, is the one that I'm really fascinated about, more so in the current times when data and information has become very important. So yeah, so my all-time favorite is actually Factfulness.
Got it. And do you follow any HR leader or CEO whom listeners should also follow?
Well, I do, of course, follow all the usuals, but I'm particularly impressed by the work Simon Sinek is doing these days, so I do follow him a little more diligently.
Got it. And do you have any advice for young HR leaders, and especially those graduates who coming out of these schools specializing in HR? What advice would you give for them?
I think a lot of people choose HR, or at least in my generation, that was the case, that they thought that they may not have to really run businesses or be devoid of the very strong pressures that business and operations have. The only advice I have is let go of that thought. If you have to succeed as an HR professional, you have to be a business professional. You need to roll up your sleeves, understand how the business runs, perhaps run the business yourself for a while, and be a support and a contributing member to the business, and not just the HR support. That's the only advice I have.
Got it. Interesting. And Shaakun, what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about you?
Follow me on LinkedIn. Shaakun Khanna is my LinkedIn profile. I have a YouTube channel where I invite, pretty much like you are doing a podcast, I invite my peers, my friends from across the globe to talk about all things future of work. So go on YouTube, subscribe to that. And of course, if you're connected with me on LinkedIn, you could definitely reach out to me and I'll be happy. You could Google my email ID or whatever, and I'm very accessible that way. And all of you are welcome to connect with me if I could be of any help in any ways.
So we'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us about how to develop informal leaders among employees.
It was a pleasure being here, Rohit. Thank you for inviting me once again.
Thanks for listening to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for new episodes.